You mentioned Dave Keating here present, who in his Substack column sounded the alarm over the way we live in Europe nowadays. How, for instance, we pay for Belgian beer at happy hour with our phones. And the chances are the United States or China's in on the act. You, Dave, in that column showed a clip from last Friday on Irish radio, the European Central Bank president, calling for Europe to take control of its digital payment destiny. Let's listen.
Whether you use a card, or whether you use a phone, typically it goes through Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Alipay. Where are all those coming from? Well, either the US or China. And the whole sort of infrastructure mechanism that allows for the payment, credit and debit, is not a European solution.
About this. I didn't realize this because it means that every time I use my credit card or use my phone, that information about me is leaving the European Union and going to the United States. I thought that was not permitted.
I'm sure they do that, in compliance with European regulations. But yes, that is the point.
So, Dave Keating, Christine Lagarde makes it sound as though that can be changed quickly.
So interestingly, it actually could. I think Europeans don't really think about the fact that they are using American technology every time they make an online payment. I think these companies, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, they start to be presented to us as kind of global companies that don't have a nationality or a home, but they do. They are American companies, and right now we don't have any alternative. We have some national payment systems, but those national payment systems, for instance, we have Payconic here in Belgium, can't be used outside Belgium. If I order something from a Dutch website, I can't use that to pay. I have to use an American provider. Now, after I published this morning, actually, I was inundated by people who have been working on this over the past 10 years, contacting me in frustration about just how hamstrung the efforts to develop a single European payments initiative have been. And the general consensus I've been hearing is, yes, the banks have been a bit lazy here, and nobody really, the thinking was, well, Visa, MasterCard works fine, so let's just stick with that no one was thinking that, a company could be a risk simply because it was American. But actually, it was the lack of political will, that if the 27 EU member states came together and said, right, we're doing this right now, it could be done tomorrow. The issue is the national governments have not made almost any effort to try to develop one single European payment system. And as Sophie just said there, now we have to do it mid-flight because the risk that Christine Lagarde was speaking of there is quite real. And I think it's a risk that most people, even though they're using these payment systems every day, haven't really thought much about.
Jakob Hessler, have you thought about it?
Yes, it's one of the topics that in one of my previous lives I was very interested in. And I think it's the lack of European payment infrastructure, but also and it goes back to financial integration. Because if you say you have a digital euro, it means the banking markets and the financial markets need to be integrated. Because attached to these files and to these transfers are credit decisions, money logic, how long can you keep this payment, and so it was much easier for pan-European or actually international global companies to adopt a single system and just through their individual market orders impose it on these countries and their customers who willingly accept it because it is more convenient than it has been to align every country with each other. But there have been previous examples. I mean, let's not forget the SWIFT system, which is the global interbank or one of the global interbank payment systems, is actually housed in Belgium, if I remember correctly. And I think what we need to do, and that's where I'm not sure that at this moment in mid-flight we cannot suddenly create, I think, a federal European Union. I think the political risk, if we now say Europe is this global thing or nothing, it is this European government.
But hang on, with the payment systems, does it have to be all or nothing? I mean, you heard Dave say, those experts telling David.
No, it doesn't. And I think that's exactly, I think rather than talk about governance, which would mean treaty change, I think there are tons of things we can do without treaty change that strengthen things that we have had, the example of defense. Everyone said if we wanted to have joint defense, we need treaty change. Everyone said if we need more investment in infrastructure, we need treaty change. And we had Euro bonds, EU bonds, everyone said it needs treaty change. So the European Union is actually quite creative when it is standing with the back to the wall, and it generally acknowledges that it is, to come up with some pragmatic solutions. And in flight at this moment, I don't see others. We can, in midterm, prepare for a stronger political integration that follows stronger economic integration, but political integration that precedes more economic integration at this moment, I'm not sure it would work. And it would all nationalists in each member country give a big incentive to become anti-European, and then we destroy the notion of this defense initiative of our security that is rebalancing more as a collective of nation state at this very moment. Whether we like it or not, that's a whole different question.
Sophie Infeld.
I'm sorry, I very much disagree with that. And the point is also, I've been doing European politics for 30 years, and I've been hearing this for 30 years. And this is where it brought us. And when you talk about defense, I think that's a very good example, because a lot of people say, oh, look, Europe is acting because it's with its back against the wall. But whenever there's a crisis, Europe is acting. But let's look closely at what has been decided here. There is not a big European fund of 800 billion euro for a European defense union. What they did is raising the debt levels for national armies who will continue to buy American equipment. So, and the equipment they buy is not for the next 2 or 3 years. It's an investment for decades. So there is just no will among the government leaders to create a Europe that is able to act. I also disagree with you that the only thing we can do is treaty change, because there is a lot and we need treaty change, we do, but there is a lot we can do without it. We could actually start by applying the treaties, because if you look at the government leaders in the European Council of Government Leaders, they have been engaging in a complete power grab, taking powers from the two legislators, taking powers from the European Commission. And actually, as I said earlier, they've paralyzed the Commission when it comes to enforcement. They could eliminate national barriers in the internal market. You don't need treaty change for that. They can take more steps in the area of defense without treaty change, and they should do so.
Yes, I agree with that, but that is not a European government. That is improving with existing instruments and creative, making the functioning and the way things function, which is not the same. You could argue the same thing about defense. So you have national armies, but how long would it take today? We don't even have effective national armies in Europe outside of the UK, France, and Poland, and then some smaller countries.
Yes, but the
idea of creating a collective European defense force right now is a project for in 20, 30 years. Yes, we should launch it, but I don't think it's realistic. But then maybe I'm too pessimistic.
Well, can I respond to that?
Sure, Sophie Infeld.
Yeah. No. The point is, no, we're not going to create a European army by next week. But if what is now being presented as, oh, look, Europe is taking action in the area of defense is actually not true. It is, again, the national governments who get more possibilities to borrow money. That's essentially what's happening. And there is no initiative except for some timid initiatives by the Commission that are being dismissed by the national government leaders to try and at least harmonize a little and to have some forward planning so that we will end on that road. Yeah, well, was.
I know.
Plan
but
for the future,
NATO
was
our European defense, and it was a multilateral, coordinated defense of individual armies, which, had the US not opted out or opted to look at it in a different way.
We could see this coming.
No, I'm not saying
we saw this coming,
but
and we didn't respond.
All right, we're getting urgence coming from the European Commission in the last minutes, and